This little video is to kind of help you focus and get some ideas on everything that you need to be focusing on for your STAAR test. And we're going to start by looking at the eras or time periods that we've covered. We covered colonization, which was the time period when the English king and their government created colonies in North America. And these coincide with your yellow flashcards. We then talked about the Revolutionary era, where we rebelled against the British king and created our own government. And this is the time period just before and during the American Revolution. And as you can see with the map on this picture, our border expanded all the way to the Mississippi River after this time period. We then studied the Constitutional Convention, and this took place in Philadelphia in 1787, and this is where we created our government that we still use today that's based on the United States Constitution. This led to a time period of the first 5 presidents known as the Early Republic, and this was represented with our white flashcards. We first look at the first 5 presidents and the precedents or patterns of behavior that they established. We then went back and we reevaluated those same 5 presidents, and we looked at their foreign policy or ways that they handled troubles that they had with other countries. We then began to look at growth, which was a 3-chapter unit, and we paired that up with the green flashcards, which represented growth. The first time we looked at the growth in the United States, we focused on the growth in science and technology, as well as the growth in social reforms, which included everything from abolitionists to temperance, which was people who were against alcohol abuse, to women's rights. We then went back and looked at the time period known as the Age of Jackson. And the reason this falls underneath growth is because it was during this time period where we see a growth in political participation in male voters. And the third section of growth that we looked at was the actual physical growth of the United States with westward expansion. And as you can see in these maps, the very first piece of the puzzle that was added was the Louisiana Purchase, which started from the Mississippi River and went west to the Rocky Mountains. After the Louisiana Purchase, if you look to the very north, around the Great Lakes, we signed the Treaty of 1818, which set the northern border of the United States at the 49th parallel. They then added Florida with the Adams-Onis Treaty in 1819. And then pioneers began to expand west out to Oregon through the Oregon Trail. And eventually, in 1845, Texas was added as a state. Now, because of Texas annexation, that caused the United States to go to war with Mexico, and after victory in the war with Mexico, we gained the Mexican Cession through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And our current borders of the contiguous, or 48 United States, was set with the Gadsden Purchase, or that tiny little piece of land in modern-day Arizona and New Mexico. We've spent the last 6 weeks looking at a very dark chapter of the United States history, and that was a period of sectionalism, when the United States divided along regional lines, mostly north and south, and over the idea of slavery in the Western territories. This eventually led to the U.S. Civil War between the northern troops, known as the Union, and the southern troops, known as the Confederacy. After the Civil War was fought, it led to a period of rebuilding in the United States known as Reconstruction. And we've just spent the last few weeks talking about the several different phases of Reconstruction, from presidential to congressional to southern. So what specific dates are you expected to know? Well, 1607, which is in the colonial era, is the date when Jamestown, or the first permanent English colony, was established in Virginia. Now, most of you probably equate the story of Pocahontas to the story of Jamestown. The other date that goes along with colonization is 1620, and that has to do with the establishment of the Plymouth colony in Massachusetts and the creation of self-government with the signing of the Mayflower Compact. Now, the date that's significant to know during the Revolutionary period is 1776, and that is the date that the Declaration of Independence was signed, creating the United States as an independent country. Now, that was not the plan or the blueprint of the government that we created. That came years later in 1787 with the writing and ratification of the United States Constitution. The major date when it comes to studying the growth of the United States is 1803, and that was when we purchased Louisiana from the French for $15 million. And then the final 2 dates that you need to know are 1861 to 1865, and that is the beginning and the end of the Civil War, the bloodiest war in the history of the United States. And lastly, you're going to want to go over and study the 7 principles of the Constitution. They are popular sovereignty, or the idea that people rule. Secondly, limited government. There are some things the government cannot do. Third, the separation of powers, legislative, executive, and judicial. Fourth, checks and balances, the fact that the branches can't take too much control over the other. 5, federalism, sharing of power between the state and national governments. 6, republicanism, the idea that you have the right to vote. And lastly, individual rights. And those are found in the amendments of the Constitution. Okay, this is something that we're going to be doing every day at the start and at the end of the class, and it says a 1 to 20. These are 20 facts that if you know, you'll be better prepared to tackle the STAAR test. So every single fact has a hand gesture, and like I said, we'll be doing it at the start and end of every class. So here we go. The first article of the Constitution is the legislative branch. It creates the Congress, which is the House of Representatives and the Senate. The second article of the Constitution is the executive branch. It gives the president the power of the veto. The third article of the Constitution is the judicial branch, and they gain their power through the Supreme Court case of Marbury versus Madison. There were no English colonies before Jamestown. The Civil War was fought across 5 Aprils, from 1861 to 1865. In 1776, the Declaration of Independence gave us our freedom from Great Britain. The Constitution, signed in 1787, created a government where the people rule through popular sovereignty. We ate up half of the country in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase, and we said 9 to a government without limits when we added the 10 amendments to the Constitution known as the Bill of Rights. George Washington gave us 2 pieces of advice in his farewell address. Avoid political parties and stay out of Europe. We didn't listen, so we fought the War of 1812. The 13th Amendment set slaves free. The 14th Amendment made them citizens. And the 15th Amendment gave them the right to vote. Because of the American system that built roads, you can drive at 16. Because of free enterprise, you can have a job at 17. And because of democracy, you can vote at the age of 18. Just like they did in Virginia in the House of Burgesses in 1619 when they elected a representative government, and the Mayflower Compact in 1620 they established self-government in Plymouth. And then you'll turn and you'll high-five your neighbor.